Local government debt crisis lurks. China opens floodgates and releases 3.7 trillion yuan. Xi Jinping inspects China's central bank, yuan at risk. China's BRI will stumble on for some time to come. It's all covered in today's China Truths. Local government debt crisis lurks. China opens floodgates and releases 3.7 trillion yuan. The debt mountain worth nearly 100 trillion yuan of local governments is in danger, and many provinces and cities cannot pay wages. To help address the issue, the Chinese government has recently decided to issue up to 2.7 trillion yuan of new local government bonds, in addition to 1 trillion treasury bonds, ahead of schedule. The plan is raising speculation that the authorities have no alternative option but to print money. A report by China state media published on October 24, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, China's top legislature, passed the State Council's proposal to issue some new local government bonds. Zhu Zhongming is Deputy Minister of China's Ministry of Finance. He said that when the ministry proposed the draft bill, some people recommended the National People's Congress authorize the State Council to issue an advance part of the new local government debt for the following years, maybe within 60% of the new debt limits projected for the current years, and the authorization period is until December 31, 2027. The local government debts include general debt and special debt. According to news outlet Caixin, the National People's Congress has authorized the State Council to issue the new debt for local governments in advance for 5 years. If calculated based on 60% of the new local debt limit in 2023, the maximum general debt and special debt quotas issued in advance in 2024 are 432 billion yuan and 2.28 trillion yuan respectively, totaling about 2.7 trillion yuan. In addition, this time China's top legislature also approved the issuance of an additional 1 trillion yuan of national debt, all of which will be allocated to local governments. The authorities issued a new 1 trillion treasury bond, which is equivalent to abandoning the 3% warning line for the deficit rate that they had previously insisted on, significantly raising the deficit rate to 3.8%. The Chinese authorities claim that the 1 trillion yuan in national debt will be used primarily for reconstruction after disaster, flood prevention and management projects, and natural disaster emergency response capacity improvement projects. However, many people believe that local governments are heavily in debt, and the funds may be used in disguise to help them repay debts or pay wages. China's local government debts are estimated to be as high as 94 trillion yuan. Yunnan, Inner Mongolia and other provinces have publicly admitted that they are incapable of debt reduction and asked for help from the central government. Some experts believe that this is equivalent to a threat that if you don't save me, I will die in front of you. At a meeting of the Political Bureau on July 24 this year, it was proposed to formulate a so-called debt package plan. Then there was news that a special financing bond plan of about 1.5 trillion yuan had been launched. In September, Inner Mongolia and many provinces and cities successively issued special refinancing bonds. On social media, some financial commentators analyzed that the authorities continue to change explanations for the bond issuance, but the essence cannot escape the printing money to repay debts. Ultimately, the debts will be passed on to the people through inflation. Xi Jinping inspects China's central bank, yuan at risk. On October 24, Chinese leader Xi Jinping suddenly inspected the People's Bank of China and the State Administration of Foreign Exchange. This was the first time he inspected the central bank since he took office. Xi's inspection highlighted some problems in China's economy, because after the real estate bubble bursts, it is likely to be followed by a full-blown financial crisis and fiscal crisis. The inspection of the central bank was also interpreted by many as Beijing's determination to take big steps to stimulate the economy, but in fact, the Shanghai stock benchmark fell below 3,000 points that day. So, why did Xi Jinping come to the central bank? What imminent crisis does he face? China's foreign exchange bottoms out and the yuan exchange rate faces a plunge. During NTD-TV's Elite Forum program, Taiwanese political and economic commentator Wu Jialong said that there is a problem involving Xi's inspection of the central bank. In the United States, the president will obviously not inspect the Federal Reserve, or U.S. central bank, because central banks in Western countries have a characteristic called central bank's independence. In the United States, the chairman of the Federal Reserve is nominated by the president and appointed with the approval of the Senate. Their positions are guaranteed. Once appointed, they cannot be removed by the president during their term. This is called central bank independence. With this independence, political hands cannot be allowed to extend into the financial field. The independence of the central bank was legally protected. This time, Xi Jinping went to inspect the People's Bank of China, and there was no doubt that there was a situation at the central bank. Commentator Wu Jialong said that China's central bank has been doing one thing from the beginning: it is to boost monetary easing, from cutting interest rates to reducing reserve requirement ratios and other related measures in order to pump money to the economy. Then she still went to the central bank. Obviously, he was not asking the central bank for more monetary easing. It is obvious that the problems encountered now must be difficult to deal with, and a big storm may be coming. It seems that one issue that will require the CCP's General Secretary to take action is that the foreign exchange reserves have been emptied, and there would be a greater crisis coming. According to China's financial statement data, its foreign exchange reserves are currently between $3.1 trillion and $3.2 trillion. Part of China's foreign debt is money borrowed from others, but it appears on the books at approximately $2.9 trillion. It means it is left with almost $200 billion of its own money. There is another problem here. Among the assets of the central bank, there is an account receivable, which is a loan that has not been repaid by others. In fact, this asset is broken, and the problem is involving in the Belt and Road project. The money released by China under the Belt and Road Initiative is estimated to have reached approximately $900 billion US dollars, of which nearly $200 billion US dollars have gone bad and have defaulted on debts, and almost all of the rest will default. It means all of them will become non-performing assets. Calculated in this way, the central bank will deduct about $900 billion from its foreign exchange reserves. It will have no money, and there will be a foreign exchange reserve crisis later. Wu Jialong said that there may be one path that cannot be avoided. It is that the exchange rate of yuan will depreciate significantly. The yuan exchange rate is under the control of the central bank. If the central bank does not have foreign exchange reserves to support the exchange rate, the rate will not be able to hold stable, and may depreciate by then. She is controlling the central bank to prevent financial collapse. Joining the elite forum, the Epoch Times chief editor Guo Jun said that Xi Jinping's inspection of the central bank reflects some changes in the power structure of the CCP and reflects the reality that Xi Jinping's personal power has expanded beyond the CCP's current system. The CCP's 20th National Congress made many so-called reforms, the biggest of which was to strip away the power functions of the State Council and transfer many functional departments that originally belonged to the State Council to the party departments, including the radio and television, social management, and some economic decision-making departments. In terms of modern political systems, the West has presidential systems and cabinet systems. In terms of the presidential system, the executive power of the President of the United States is very huge. He has absolute personal power over the executive branch. There is no barrier between the President and the ministries and commissions below. They are all under direct leadership, without the need for a State Department. Xi Jinping's model is partly based on the American presidential system. After Xi Jinping came to power, he established various groups to govern the country. By the 20th National Congress, these groups were standardized and functionalized, and ministries and commissions of the State Council were moved into the CCP groups. Of course, at that time, it was no longer called a group, but became a committee. In this way, the State Council was ignored. So this time, Xi's inspection of the People's Bank of China was a result of this adjustment of the power structure. Because of the institutional characteristics of the CCP itself, Xi Jinping's adjustment has become unprecedented. In the United States, the president actually cannot control the Federal Reserve, Congress, local governments, media, public opinion, or religious and other social groups. But in China, Xi Jinping can control all these departments and institutions, and they all have absolute power. So it will intensify the internal struggle among the top leaders of the CCP and intensify the conflict between Xi Jinping and the powerful CCP family. Guojun said that with the intensification of internal strife at the top of the CCP and the risk of economic collapse, Xi Jinping must first control the People's Bank of China to prevent financial collapse and take some preventive measures. China's BRI will stumble on for some time to come. Beijing seems eager to change the downward trajectory of BRI. Can they make any difference? In the article Beijing tries to reboot its Belt and Road Initiative, Mr. Milton Ezrati presented an analysis about this issue. Mr. Ezrati is the chief economist for Vested, a New York-based communications firm. According to the expert, recognizing how its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has weakened, Beijing took the occasion of this year's summit to press something of a makeover. But while Chinese leader Xi Jinping spoke glowingly of the future, he effectively described the same arrangements that have long prevailed. China would provide less developed nations financing and skills to build needed infrastructure and manage the projects once completed. He said little to address the frustrations that many have with this reality, that the projects have failed to pay adequate returns, leaving participants with debts they cannot repay and burdening Chinese lenders with questionable loans. It looks then as though the BRI will continue to weaken and fail Beijing's once vaunted ambitions for the project. The failure to deal with substance was not the only failure at this year's summit. Fewer nations participated than in the past. Last year's summit gathered some 40 heads of state. This year, only slightly over half that number attended. Many nations sent lower-ranked representatives. People from Europe and North America were almost absent. Most noticeable were the low profiles taken by Italy and Greece, two BRI participants. Both have expressed disappointment with the arrangements. Italy seems to be on the verge of pulling out of the BRI altogether. Aside from Mr. Xi, the most prominent figure at the summit was Russia's Vladimir Putin, who spoke of the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline to bring natural gas from northern Russia to China via Mongolia. Mr. Putin also touted Russia's Northern Sea route to carry shipping between Asia and Europe via the Arctic and avoid the Suez Canal. All understood his presence and dependence on China. They also noted that neither project is part of the BRI. Among those participating in the initiative, each specific problem had its own details, but all had the same roots. Just about every project, whether done in Central Asia, Africa, or Europe, reflected political and diplomatic rather than economic calculations. Many consequently have failed to throw off enough income to repay the loans originally advanced by state-owned Chinese banks. Already, Sri Lanka, Chad, Ethiopia, and Zambia are in restructuring negotiations, while Pakistan, an early BRI member and the recipient of a good deal of Chinese money, has had to turn to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for help with its debts. It is estimated that some 60% of all BRI loans lie with nations in financial distress, largely because of BRI arrangements. Long before this recent summit, the lack of enthusiasm had already slowed the growth of BRI arrangements. In Africa, for example, the BRI closed the equivalent of only about $1 billion in deals, a far cry from 2019's figure of $8.5 billion. Overall, in the first 6 months of this year, the most recent period for which data are available, BRI-related deals totaled the equivalent of some $40 billion. That is a slightly faster pace than 2022, which totaled $68 billion for the whole year, but it is far short of the $100 billion a year averaged at the initiative's height. China's state-affiliated banks are also resisting. As BRI clients have had difficulty paying, Beijing has pressured the banks to accommodate delayed payments and do so quietly so as not to embarrass the initiative. The banks accordingly have extended loan maturities in the vain hope that failing projects will, in time, pay enough to discharge the associated financial obligations. Among bankers the world over, this practice is derisively called extend and pretend. Some Chinese banks have gone so far as to ask Beijing for letters with the moniker policy designated to indicate that the decision to make the loan came out of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and not the bank's management. This banking resistance has grown especially intense of late as banks have had to deal with internal financial failures. The failures of leading property developers have many consequences. Exacerbating such strains is the growing tendency for individual Chinese to refuse payment on mortgages for apartments that the failed developers will likely never complete. Nor is there any sign that Beijing will relieve these strains. Enthusiasm of a sort might have returned at the summit had Mr. Xi offered practical remedies, but little was forthcoming. Far from offering ways to relieve the debt, Mr. Xi's speech never even mentioned the problem. The best he could do was offer an injection of the equivalent of $47.9 billion, hardly enough to make much difference. Otherwise, he had only two measures to offer. One was that the BRI would shift towards smaller projects in the future. Small mistakes are certainly better than the big mistakes of the past. But the continuation of mistaken projects was assured in the second measure announced at the gathering. The BRI would, the guests were told, orient its efforts to more targeted projects, such as green energy and healthcare, in other words, more politically and diplomatically determined efforts, the same thing that produced poor payouts in the past. No doubt, the BRI will stumble on for some time to come. Beijing has too much prestige wrapped up in the project to let it go. But it is hardly the vehicle to extend the CCP's power than it once seemed to be. Nothing is clearer from this year's summit than that. Don't forget to leave a comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from China Truths.